global health crisis, soaring unemployment, a global movement for racial justice, and a monumental election. It was a year many would never want to revisit. A year of non-stop confusion, heartache, and restlessness. A year that we kept saying to ourselves, this cannot possibly be any worse.
"2020 started out with a lot of optimism because it was 2020. It was supposed to be the year of vision.
It started out like what seemed to be like a phenomenal, great year. You know, in January, I'm like, yes, I'm gonna get the ball rolling this year. 2020, baby, year of vision.
The vision was a nightmare.
2020 was just, it had a lot going on.
2020 turned out to be pretty traumatic for myself and my family.
"2020 started off with a bang. Everybody was hopeful not just for a new year, but also a new decade. In Australia, they were dealing with bushfires that started in December of 2019 and carried over into the new year.
It was pretty obvious straight away that it was a big one and that we'd probably be involved.
Tensions flared with the US and Iran.
The aftermath shows an attack that was deliberate and sustained. With around a half dozen explosions, the Americans firing with drones clearly didn't want to miss their target, Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. He'd reportedly just gotten into Iraq from Beirut and was leaving Baghdad airport when he was killed in a convoy of vehicles along with a top Iraqi militia leader.
Just when we thought we had seen it all, health authorities announced that the coronavirus that started in Wuhan, China, might be a little more serious. Although initially they told us that it was just like the flu. Don't panic. It will magically disappear.
One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
It's going to go away. It's going away. It will go away, just stay calm.
We knew about the coronavirus in 2019, in November. I remember reading about it. I was asking myself, wow, you know, this could be something big. By about February, what happened was I read that people over in the surrounding suburbs had got it.
How did you feel when you heard about it?
When I first heard about it was probably right about, I think the first case in the US was right about the time I left to go to Australia. And I was like, oh, well, they say it's just like the flu, so I'll be fine. Somebody offered me a mask to wear on the flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll take it. And I was like, okay, this thing, I cannot breathe.
Spread of the deadly coronavirus. Now, a short time ago, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak an international public health emergency.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The next thing you know, everything is flying off the shelves in the grocery stores.
I was working at the grocery store, Meijer, as a cashier. Bruh, like, it was a lot going on with these fully grown adults acting like kids at a freaking candy store.
That's when we started to think it might actually be worse than the flu.
A lot of people were concerned, you know, and then you notice people were getting sick. You notice a few people had died. I remember seeing on a news report that there was this elderly lady. She wasn't elderly, but she was a senior citizen, and she had passed. And automatically what went through my head, as I'm quite sure a lot of people's heads who have older family members, you start worrying about your mother or your father, if they're senior citizens.
Countries all over the world went into lockdown. You couldn't even leave the house. Life in quarantine at first for me was daily panic attacks, to the point that my doctor was like, I'm going to give you something to calm you down, because I was paranoid, because it suddenly went from, oh, it's just the flu, to, if you catch this, you will die.
It was one of the hardest things for me to deal with. Just no human interaction. It caused a lot of depression and anxiety. Not being able to have the same routine that you normally would is just very depressing, and run out for rolls and rolls of toilet paper that were selling like hotcakes off the shelves, and you couldn't find them everywhere, and water, and you don't even know if you should get canned goods, and how much meat do you have to buy to stock up and have groceries for your family.
This pandemic is putting an end to the longest economic expansion in U.S. history.
We are going into a global recession. We're in an economic downturn.
The world is now in recession.
Recession in the next quarter or two.
Within a couple months, the virus spread all across the globe. Life suddenly came to a standstill. Levels of anxiety and depression soared.
You get up in the morning and you're living in close quarters now, and you're quarantined and you don't have a lot of social life. So that outlet just wasn't there. And it affected me in ways that I didn't think it would. Having to just detox and listen to music to try to get some type of outlet, to take myself away from the serenity of just being in close quarters all day.
I couldn't believe that our world and our reality had become, just stay in the house, or we had to quarantine, and now we have to wear these face masks and just things you see in movies, and I'm just like, this is not real. This not real. It took a lot out of me, especially me being a person that's always on the go, to just sit and stay in the house a lot.
It tends to play with your emotions and your mental health as well, especially if you're an extrovert and you like to be around people and socialize. It's become really damaging to deal with for people that are that way.
Movie theaters and restaurants closed. If you wanted entertainment, you were going to have to binge watch Netflix, which worked out for the show Tiger King. If you wanted to have a drink with your friends, you were doing it over Zoom. Suddenly, everybody had an interest in baking bread and doing dances on TikTok.
My job was pretty much one of the first to get shut down. It's kind of hard trying to make a living when you have nowhere to go to make money to make a living. So it was kind of rough.
Schools were forced to send their students home, and parents had to help teachers with homeschooling.
So now we have to balance being a mommy, being a grandmommy, and decide on what's more important. Do I join this Zoom call? And I have to, because this is my obligation, but I'm also obligated to family, so I'm torn between the two.
Anxiety had flared up because not only that I'm teaching from home, but I now realize that I'm pregnant, and now I have to take care of myself, and then just working from home and trying to engage with the students on Zoom calls.
Small businesses suffered devastating losses. Some of them may never reopen.
Businesses all around me were shutting down and boarding up and going out of business, to say the least. Then we had, ongoing issues with insurance companies that were saying that a lot of businesses was not going to be protected by their insurance companies due to this national disaster. I was so frustrated, I was so aggravated, I was so uncertain as to how my business would survive.
Hospitals across the globe were stretched to their limits. Healthcare workers struggled to find enough protective gear. Emergency rooms were jam-packed, and elective procedures or just general health care was put off to focus on those who needed treatment for the virus.
Have a visit on Zoom instead of actually going into the hospital. Happened to do a lot of the appointments by myself because they didn't want my partner there because of COVID and different things. Yeah, it was very hard for me because I felt like I was doing my pregnancy alone.
Healthcare workers face traumas that they may deal with for the rest of their lives. Anxiety, depression, PTSD. Some sadly were even driven to suicide.
So the stress and anxiety this pandemic has caused healthcare workers, myself included, having gone through COVID and knowing what it's like to be afraid that you're not going to wake up. You have insomnia because you're afraid you're just not going to wake up the next day. You can't breathe. Knowing that this is what the patients were going through and what their experience was, and some of those who never made it home, it put a lot of stress and strain on healthcare workers, and being afraid of taking this home to our families, and the sleepless nights, and just being overwhelmed with everything, and with a lot of the public not really accepting what's happening, and then other people being afraid of this virus. It put a lot of strain on our mental health, and there were days we would cry and just feel like we were defeated, but the next day we would just get up and do it all over again.
I caught COVID while I was pregnant. It was the worst. Being the first time mom for the first time and just being pregnant, oh my God, my anxiety went through the roof. I just couldn't believe it. Catching COVID right at the end of my pregnancy.
You know, found out 2 days later, my older brother called me. He says they were taking my mom to the hospital, that she had caught the virus. And I was just worried, like a lot of people from there. And she was on 2% oxygen, went from 2% all the way to 90% in 5 days. My mom was gone. Yeah, that was kind of difficult, you know.
So being a nurse during this pandemic has been pretty crazy. In the beginning, a lot of people were afraid, but there were also a lot of nurses, such as myself, who this is just what we do, and we just knew we had to step all in and do everything we could. It was hot wearing all the PPE. It was tiring, but we did it for the patients. We had to keep our patients safe.
The killing of George Floyd in Minnesota at the hands of the police sparked off a wave of protests and riots all across the globe as people called for a look into police brutality and racial injustice in the world.
Man, seeing that man murdered on national television, that was devastating. Honestly. People are tired of seeing stuff like that. Police brutality against the black community. People are honestly tired of it. People protesting all over the world. I was even a part of the protest.
Let's fast forward. Need a cup of coffee. So the election for me, I did early voting And I was like very hopeful. I was like, okay, here's the deal. If Trump wins, I got my passport. I'm not dealing with 4 more years of this. I will find my way out of this country. I cannot do this anymore. But then on election night, you know, you started seeing red state, and you're like, nail biting, like, oh crap, maybe I am gonna have to leave the country. But I have a friend who has a political science degree, and he was like, take a deep breath. He was like, here's the deal. Here's how it works. Here's how I know it works. Trust the process. And after he told me that, I calmed down.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
I think I was actually asleep when they announced that he was the official winner on a Saturday. But what excited me most is that we finally had a female vice president. We finally broke that glass ceiling. Finally, some light at the end of that tunnel.
So when I heard about the vaccine, I was a little cautious just because it was so new. But at the same time, I was really excited. I actually got to work in the vaccine clinic when they rolled it out at the institution I work for. And the day that we vaccinated our first patient, I literally cried tears of joy because I was so happy.
2020 taught me how to adapt.
2020 taught me to spread more love in the world because you never know what can happen.
One of the things you learn when you go through a situation like that with a virus is you become more disciplined.
So he taught me that there's so many things in life that just aren't important, all those little petty things that don't really matter. We can't let that get to us because we've been through so much in 2020 that we are so much more resilient and strong and caring than we thought that we were. And we could get through anything. If we could get through this pandemic the way that we have working together, we can get through anything.
And I'm just so excited, and I believe that if I can survive a pandemic, I can survive anything because we came out strong. We had record-breaking numbers for the year of 2020, so it did take a turn. It took a lot of work. I was stressed out, I will admit, but I pushed through and I kept showing up every day in my business, and I operated my business as if there was no pandemic actually happening around me.
If there's anything that we should learn from 2020, it's that we are strong, we are resilient, and we can overcome just about anything. Let's stay connected, not just social media connected, but on a personal human level.